Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world. It's once again time for the internet's favorite movie-centric list-making podcast. I am one of your hosts, Josh, joined with me, as always, by the other list maker, Jen.
Hey, how's everything going tonight?
Pretty good, pretty good. Unless you were asking the audience,
Awesome.
and then
I'm asking everyone in general. It's a bit of a rhetorical question since I don't actually expect any kind of response.
whereas
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it was a rhetorical question because I don't actually care.
Well, that's not. I care. I absolutely care. It's just that uh, what can I say?
Okay, I care.
Podcasting has
I
its
care.
own limitations.
Yeah, and it's got its own traditions, like asking people that can't answer you how they're doing.
Yeah. That's. I think that's 100% true. Hey, you want to know what I did this week?
Yes, I do.
Uh,
More than anything.
I rearranged all of my books. Actually, I took like inventory stock of all my books. You want to know how many books I ended up counting?
7,
No, many more.
10.
Oh my god. Okay, I'll just tell you. I have about 500 books.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah, I feel like I should have more, and I think maybe some of them are in storage, like from the last time that we moved. But I have 500 active books. That is, books that I can actively get my hands on. And I found books that I forgot that I had, and I found books that I did that thing where you go to the bookstore and you go, "Oh, but I need this book," and then you bring it home and you never read it, uh, only to discover it later, and then you're like, "Oh, I have this book. I should read this. This is actually pretty good. Wow, I have good taste in books." So yeah. So I've been reading a ton over the past couple of weeks.
I'm gonna send you a picture on Facebook real quick.
Oh yes.
Yes, it's of my boudoir.
Does it have 500 books in it?
No, but it kind of like if there was ever a corner of my life that kind of sums up who I am, I think this is it.
It's the bookshelf, right?
Yes, there's a bookshelf in the photo.
Yes. And honestly, that's so some of my titles include uh writing dialogue, uh screenwriting secrets, and then I've got Where the Sidewalk Ends, The Illustrated World of Tolkien, Helen of Troy, Greek classics, the complete works of William Shakespeare, family recipes, blue, just blue. It's just a history of the color blue. It's
Okay.
fascinating, unbelievably good reading. I also have a book called Salt, which is just about the history of human beings needing and trading salt. Things like that make me very happy. So I'm a happy camper right now because I have so much to read that I didn't even realize that I did have. So I'm excited.
It seems we both like to hold dead trees every once in a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not just and also they're not dead trees, they're just repurposed trees. Don't call them dead. They're not dead. They're living things.
But they give a new type of life. How about that?
Yes, repurposed I think is one of the best. I love that term. I love repurposed. It's a good term.
You win.
Well, speaking of very eclectic things, this week's
Mm-hmm.
list was a crazy run. Uh and it oh my gosh, there were so many. I won't say that I had like a hard time with like putting the list together, but I
Mm-hmm.
really had to go back and I second guessed myself on so much. So I don't know. We'll have to see how this turns out.
It's
Was it
funny.
easy for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Because I came up with the topic, so yeah, of course it can be a little easier for me. Um, because I always think I've thought about these things for a long time, but because now, okay, for those of you unawares, you got to put that on a t-shirt. since I say it so much, for those of you unawares, this week's topic is all about countries that are represented or have been represented in Eurovision. This is coming off the heels of a hot Eurovision contest from last week, where congratulations to Sweden once again for taking home the top prize, even though Finland did get the viewer vote. Cha cha cha. Anyway, and you probably funny little side note when Jen came into the chat tonight, came into the studio. There was a video playing, and Jen couldn't hear the video.
Couldn't.
So to her, I'm guessing it just seemed like, oh, there's this half dressed woman dancing around on the ceiling and half unicorns.
I mean, it was interesting.
That was the Israeli entry into.
Hey,
Eurovision.
it just so happens that I have a movie that is set in Israel. So
no, let's not spoil it just yet.
That's actually, well, it's just timely. Just saying, it's timely.
Very timely, very timely. So I guess without further ado, should we get the show on the road?
Let's do it.
All right. Who should go first?
You go first, because I think I went first last week.
Okay, sounds good. My number 10. I was going to say my first entry. No, my number 10 on my list is a movie that I have talked about before, and actually kind of recently, so I'm going to keep it short. It is the first Mission Impossible movie from 1996. What country is represented here? It is Ukraine. Ooh. Since that's where the catalyst of their Mission Impossible begins. Ethan Hunt's team gets taken down in Ukraine. Hasta lasagna, don't get any on ya. And that's who my list is representing. Ukraine. Last year's winners, by the way, they won. And, because they won last year, they were supposed to host this year's Eurovision, but evidently they're having some issues with some neighbors, and it was actually done in Liverpool. So Mission Impossible, my number 10 for representing Ukraine. That's
not a bad... I mean, I feel like that's actually pretty solid. Okay, so full disclosure. I started this list, and then halfway through my list, because I started the list like right after our show last week, and then I had to pick it up at the beginning of the week this week so that I could get the rest of the list done. And apparently, in that time, my rather disconnected, I won't say ADD brain, but whatever was sort of mulling around in there, made me forget that it was that the movies could take place in a country, and I started like picking movies from different countries. And so my list is going to be rather eclectic. Let's just say eclectic.
Just like Eurovision.
Oh boy. I mean, wow. Yeah. Okay. I guess that is. Probably.
I think it just means you understood the assignment.
I understood the assignment, but I took it in two different directions. So yeah, we'll see. Okay. All right. So my number 10 entry is a movie called Ordette. It is a 1955 movie that is a Danish drama. It is such an interesting movie. Ordette is basically the Danish word for it. It means the word.
Can you spell that, please?
Ordet. 1955. The best way that I can describe this particular movie is it's really about a farmer and his sons, and they have very wide-ranging religious beliefs. His youngest is more like his dad, but the eldest has completely lost his faith, and the middle child is a little bit delusional, I guess is a good way to say it. And he thinks that he is the embodiment of Jesus Christ. Um, Basically, all of these things become they sort of converge when the wife goes into labor and the childbirth is incredibly difficult. And so all of these different sort of philosophical ideas kind of come into play. Now, the reason that I love this movie so much is because it is sort of um, it's sort of the idea behind like it's a wide metaphor for the way that we look at religion from the most, I need to have empirical data to I'm willing to take everything on faith to I really don't understand why you can't see me as the Christ himself. And there are pieces to this which just feel they're so well acted and so well done that it's hard to see this film and not feel a sense of human existential crises in the middle of it, both from the family perspective and from each individual character's perspective. It's really well worth a watch. Again, it was a 1955 film. It's called Ordette, and I highly recommend it. So the country that this is representing is um, Denmark. Sorry.
Denmark. Okay. Okay. Well, my number 9 is one you're familiar with.
Ooh, that's always good.
That's not saying much considering how much you're familiar with, to be honest. Um, but it is one that I know you like, and coincidentally, I do too. So
That's
that's
always a good sign, by the way.
what can I say? When I first heard of this movie, I was like, I guess I kind of want to see it. So I guess I will take a chance, take a chance, take a chance.
Good
Yes,
choice.
my number 9 is Mamma Mia, representing Greece.
Such a good
Fun
choice.
fact: ABBA became world renowned thanks to the Eurovision contest. That's right. They were former Eurovision champions. Next year, it will be 50 years since they won.
Wow. That's kind
And
of scary, actually.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
50 years, 19 something, 1973,
That's like
63,
that's
63.
crazy. That's so wow.
But yeah, it's a story that would make Jerry Springer very happy. Even Maury would love to get his hands on this one. Uh, so you've come to find out who the father of your child is and sing songs. We're going to have a great hour of television today. And then we get all the great ABBA music. So you have so much going on here, so many ties to Eurovision. How could I not include this wonderful jukebox musical on the list? Who doesn't? I mean, there aren't many musical groups out there that you can say everybody likes at least one song from this group. ABBA's one of them. Everybody likes an ABBA song,
At least one.
at least one.
Yeah.
And if you watch this movie strictly for the music, you know what? That works. I mean, they're not going to, sell out, stadiums with their voices, but I think they honor the music very well, especially considering the setting and the story they're telling. So, absolutely, Mamma Mia is not my number 9 all day. Quite frankly, it could have been higher, but I do believe in my list that strongly that it only made it to number 9.
That's pretty good, actually. That's, I mean, I'm actually pretty impressed that you watched the movie. To be honest,
I watched it and I love it.
nice. Um. Okay, so my number 9 is the movie Spectre, which takes place in Austria. And it's a James Bond with Daniel Craig movie. Um, okay, so basically, first he starts out in. Uh, oh wait, did I just say this? Yeah, no, I did. I said it right. Okay. Oh, this is one of the ones where I got confused. Okay. I had to remember everything here. Okay. So the movie actually is supposed to take place in Mexico, right? Um, because Daniel Craig is on a rogue mission in Mexico City, right? And but the movie itself was shot in large part in Austria. And so this is one of those movies where everything kind of went out of whack and I was like, "Oh yeah, but it was all shot in Austria, so that represents Austria, right?" So this is and this is actually kind of an outlier for me. Although I guess the movie could still stand because they do kind of go different places too. So I think it kind of works because they end up in Europe. They go, I think they actually go to Austria because there's a part where they're like uh in that mountain scene and there's a ton going on there. So I'm pretty sure that there's that piece too. So I think it all works. Despite the fact that it starts out in Mexico, I think it's all fine. But Spectre isn't actually my most favorite James Bond movie, but it is one of the, I think, one of the coolest movies for certain kinds of action scenes, especially the outdoor action scenes. Because I don't know, sometimes James Bond movies can get a little bit stale with the indoor close proximity fighting, or I don't know, city parkour and stuff like that. Spectre definitely had some pretty amazing backdrops, which I really liked. But this movie is kind of it was a weird choice, and I fully admit it, but I just don't have anything to replace it with. So Spectre, Austria, 2015, James Bond. I hope that that works.
Well, I added it to your list, which you can find on Letterboxd if you're looking into seeing what we're talking about. 1021 Pod on Letterboxd. Sign up. Follow us on the dang thing, and you'll
I
be
feel
able
like
to
my other
see all
movies
of our
work
links.
better. I hope that they work better.
So you ready for my number 8?
I am so ready for your number 8. I mean, anything to relieve the pressure from me adding, weird outlive movies. Yes, please. Save me, Josh.
Well, it's funny because my number 8, has a James Bond in it.
Ooh,
It has a Pierce Brosnan James Bond.
no way.
Well, okay, it has a Pierce Brosnan, and he plays Eric Eriksson, the father of Lars Eriksson, one half of the musical group Fire Saga.
Yeah, don't say.
I'm talking about, of course, representing Iceland, Eurovision Song Contest, the story of Fire Saga. I mean, after all, it's got Eurovision in the name. It had to make an appearance somewhere, right? And quite frankly, because it's one of those comedy films that I should put higher up on my list. But you know what? I said Iceland deserves to make the list. They are classic Eurovision. I mean, I don't know if you watched the contest, but when the jury did its voting in the finals, they cut to Iceland, and the representative from Iceland was wearing like a leather mask,
Oh,
and then he like reached up, unzipped the mouth, and just said, "What did he say?" He was like, "Sweden."
Oh my god.
And that was it. They're so weird. Iceland's always weird in Eurovision. That's why we love them. So the story of Fire Saga is it stars Will Ferrell and Rachel McAdams as the duo Fire Saga. You know, childhood friends. They watched ABBA win Eurovision. That's kind of what got Lars out of his funk after his mom died. That's what made Sigrid start speaking, it seems, because she started singing. And Lars's dream is to, he wants to go to Eurovision and win. But he, along the way, finds out that there are other things that are important too. So it's a hilarious film that if you're a fan of oddball comedies, especially about oddball song contests, and I can't say it's an oddball song, it's the greatest song contest in the world. But if you're into Will Ferrell or Eurovision, this is a match made in heaven for you, and that's why it's my number 8. And also, of course, Ya Ya Ding Dong.
Okay, I have no idea what that means, but okay. I
So you
I
haven't seen
trust
it?
it's often. No, I have not.
Well, minor spoiler. Lars and Lars writes the songs for the group. Sigrid, he has that whole, but I have a song, Lars. We should do my song. When will we do my song? And of course, he's like, no, 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 Sigrid. We're going to do my songs. But whenever they play in the bar, and Lars wants to play like, a cool song that he wrote, everybody in the bar is like, no, you play Ya Ya Ding Dong. So it's just one of those sing along deals that everybody likes them to play.
Okay, so kind of like a sea shanty.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay. My number 8 movie represents Spain. And I kind of say this is one of those movies that like I sort of fell into because of Lord of the Rings, because Viggo Mortensen was in it, and I'm such a sucker for historical dramas, that it kind of doesn't matter if they are good or not good. I will watch the heck out of them because they're just plain cool to watch. If somebody took the time to set up 16th century anything, I'm there to watch it. And this particular one it's been written about a lot. The name of the movie is Capitan a la Triste. Uh, it's spelled Alatriste. And it basically, so there's a series of books that go by this name, and I happened to, after I saw the movie, I happened to see one at a local friends of the library, and I picked it up, and it's actually quite good. It reads a lot like Cromwell's sort of series, um or well, yeah, I guess sort of. Kind of reads like, I don't know if you know who Sharp is, but it kind of reads like a Sharp series. He's a mercenary, and it is sort of it's an interesting idea because he was a soldier. He ends up being a mercenary, and he kind of takes on this almost like mythic sort of figure, where people have heard of his exploits, and they hear his name, and they obviously, they both fear and revere. Um, but there's a whole series of historical events that we don't get a lot of Spain history in our Western history profiles. We just don't read a whole lot about it. So this is really interesting because there was something called these imperial wars that happened in Spain. And it's fascinating to read not just like how things were set up in 15th century Spain, 16th century Spain, I'm sorry, but also how different the politics of that region of the world were, because I'm definitely much more of a history buff when it comes to ancient Rome and then medieval England and France. But this was really new. So when I saw the movie, or when, well, first I saw the movie. When I saw the movie, that was interesting enough. And lots of cool ideas kind of come out of it. Viggo Mortensen gives a performance that is just pure Viggo Mortensen. I mean, he just always brings his A game. He's a very spirited actor. So like, he puts a lot, I think, of himself into his roles, and this was no exception. It was really interesting. I really liked it. I loved the sets, and the fight choreography was actually really well done too. Lots of authentic sort of swordplay for the time, and a lot of authentic armaments, which I also really liked. I thought that was great. It was such a good touch. The story itself is not the best, but as representation for Spain, I felt like this was a really good movie. So, Capitan Alatriste gets my number 8 pick and represents Spain. If you like Viggo Mortensen, you'll like this. If you're a history buff, you'll love it.
Okay, I'm gonna have to add that to my watch list.
This was 2006, by the way.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd have that added to your Jen's Eurovision Nations in Film list,
Nice.
as you can find it on Letterboxd. I say that word so much, you would think I'm shilling for him.
I mean, you kind of have to, right?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I do.
Yeah.
So my number 7, if I'm keeping track of the numbers correctly,
Number
my
7.
number 7. Okay, representing France, and it's not Home Alone 2.
Oh, that's probably a good sign. I'm happy to hear that.
This is one that some people might not think would be on my list, but here it is. It's about this lovely lady as she treks to Paris to buy a dress. I'm talking about Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
Ooh, nice one. I like that movie.
It was a very fun movie. It was a lot, it's weird because when I, first saw or heard of it, I was like, oh, it's a movie about buying a dress. But it seems to be getting a lot of acclaim. Let me see what this is about.
It's about so much more than buying a dress.
It is. It is about so much more than that. It's about like breaking the system and trying to rebuild it in something better. It's about so many things, of which we don't have time to just like go ahead and break everything down. But long story short, yes, Mrs. Harris, who is a housekeeper, essentially, and she sees that the person she works for has this extravagant dress, and she's like, the her boss is like, oh, it cost £500,
Yikes.
and she's like, what? How could that cost so much money? It's so beautiful, it's extravagant, but 500, that's crazy. And then she comes into some money, and she's a widower, and she comes into some money, and she's like, you know what? I'm gonna get myself one of them 500-pound dresses. I'm sorry, they call it a frock. I'm gonna get myself one of them 500-pound frocks. So, she has to carefully schedule herself off from work so she can go and look at this collection from Dior. And that's the fashion house. She gets there. There's some issues. They need her to stick around a little while. She's like, I can't really, because I've got to get back to work. If I don't get back to work, I get fired. And if I'm fired, I'm out on the street. That kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those sort of fun, heartwarming stories about this woman who is your classic fish out of water, not because she's uncomfortable where she is, because she's seemingly very comfortable no matter where she is, because she knows who she is.
Yeah.
And that's it's not her being uncomfortable that makes the movie fun. It's the fact that everybody else is uncomfortable around her because she's so confident, and it starts rubbing off on them, and they start altering how they feel about themselves in a way. And that's, I mean, that's really the magic of Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, in a nutshell. And I would love to see more. You know, hate to keep using the term heartwarming, but more heartwarming stories like this, where your main character, while not perfect, isn't the one that has to sort of overcome personal, like flaws in their character. No, Mrs. Harris is fine. She needs to realize that she's more important than she is, but that it's not one of those things where she has this huge inner problem to overcome. It's everybody else that's kind of becoming better because she's around, and I really dig that. Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris is my number 7, representing France.
It's she's such a no nonsense kind of a person, but not no nonsense like in a mean way, just like, you know, like you said, confident, but confident in a very in a very I recognize that this is the way that things to be, but I have to tell you that this is not the way that things are for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Yes, I absolutely love that movie.
I
That
think
was a good choice.
one of my without being specific, I think a good example would be, someone telling her, well, that's not the way it's done, and she like gets them confused when she says, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it should be.
Just plain matter of factly, you know it's like,
Yeah,
well,
I
that
love
would be the
her.
simplest solution. Why don't we do it that way? Because I don't know, it's just what we've always done.
Yeah, to some degree, she really reminds me of my grandmother. She just has that. She has that entire affect to her. So that might be why I like that movie so much. But that was a good choice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, my number 7 movie is, I spoke about it at the top of the show. It is from, oh no, wait, did I? Yes, I did. It is from Israel. Okay, well, technically it's not actually from Israel, and the movie actually begins in England, I think. Um, but they end up on crusade. And not only do they end up on crusade, but they end up basically in Jerusalem defending this holy capital city of Jerusalem, to which they lose, by the way. In case, spoiler alert, history was not very kind to the Crusaders. Probably rightly so, for just marching in and thinking they could take over somebody else's homeland. Um, I, man, so fraught with so many different things and ideas. But Ridley Scott brought us the movie Kingdom of Heaven. And so I have a lot of problems with Kingdom of Heaven. Um, and then I'll tell you why I chose this movie. I have so many problems with Kingdom of Heaven because it over idealizes this idea that somehow uh, a white savior could come in and, fix the things that were wrong, protect the travelers, keep Jerusalem safe from the marauding, um, from Salah army, keep Jerusalem safe. Basically, from the people that Jerusalem should have been in the hands of in the first place. It has a lot of odd sort of like explanations for and excuses for the Crusades, by making the main character Balian not care about the religious affiliations, or the, I don't really care about God, your God, my God, any God. And that seems ridiculous because we're talking about the Crusades, we're talking about the Middle Ages, and if you really espoused any of those beliefs, you would be burned at the stake for being a heretic. So, I mean, there's lots of problems with this movie. However, I will say that I do think in some ways this movie gives us maybe one of the best glimpses into why the seats of power were so incredibly important. The the king that dies in Kingdom of Heaven, leaving this vacancy, basically dies without having an army to support him, and or that doesn't have an army that supports Jerusalem, not in the way that would make it defensible. And I find this very interesting because this is one of the core things about the Crusades, and especially about the fall of Jerusalem, that we don't often talk about. We don't talk about how incredibly fraught with just hubris the end of the Crusades were for Jerusalem. And I mean, we go back and forth because during the Crusades they try to take Jerusalem back, and it still is contentious. And so I give the movie credit for trying to call attention to certain aspects of the Crusades, at least to try to make them not glamorized, which I do really appreciate. But I also think that, Kingdom of Heaven has its own problems by creating a bit of a milk toast protagonist who cannot commit one way or the other to any side of the issue, except the side that is basically like, well, I'll be the Da Vinci that you need. It doesn't, that never sat right with me. But I do like this movie a lot for trying to break different kinds of ground, with the crusade narrative. So it doesn't get everything right, but it gets enough right that it is, to me, enjoyable on the level of you're going to think differently about the crusades than you did when you walked into it. So Kingdom of Heaven, my number 7, representing Israel.
Okay, I can't say that I've seen that one.
Oh, really? You never saw Kingdom of Heaven?
Mm-mm.
Wow, I'm actually a little bit surprised at that. I don't know why, but I guess you're not really like a huge Ridley Scott fan or anything.
I would say I'm a huge Ridley Scott fan. I did love his sci-fi.
Yeah, everybody loves Blade Runner. Also, everybody like me loves Legend.
Yeah. So maybe this
I
is
mean,
one that I should check out.
well, it's not. See, that's the thing. This is sort of like the pivot point for Ridley Scott. This is Ridley Scott after Gladiator, um, doing sort of the history to be a little bit more true to life than we've seen. Because usually when we see stories about the Crusades, right, we usually see the West side Christianity as being the champion, and
Mm-hmm.
Islam being basically like the villains. They're all horrible. They're all terrible people. And I will say that Ridley Scott tries to go the opposite direction, which is basically to say, no, the Crusades were just a terrible time and people were just terrible all around. But it doesn't go far enough for me. Like, we need to admit that the whole idea of the Christians taking quote unquote the Holy Land was not just a terrible idea, but a naked grab for power and riches. And it just wasn't like we never really, we always walk right up to that line and then we just refuse to cross it because we have an ingrained understanding in the West about our historical theology, if you will, that Christianity tends to be more sanctimonious, I guess, in some ways. Like, hey, it's supposed to be this way. This is Christians were just doing what they thought was right, and no, no, it doesn't work. So he tries, but it just doesn't quite get there. You know what I mean?
I'm thinking. I think I get what you're laying down.
It's a little bit like some of the Christopher Columbus movies that were made, where they really tried to make Christopher Columbus be sort of, you know, okay, well, he was not a nice person, and there were a lot of really bad things that happened. But they
Mhm.
walk right up to the line, and then they don't really say, yeah, this was a terrible thing that he did. And instead, they still have to sort of extol the virtues of Christopher Columbus by making him seem like, but he was such a great explorer. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, we can talk about the fact that people are good at one thing and brought us advances, and we can still look at them and say, yes, but they also did some very terrible things. Instead of trying to sort of explain away in a fiction, reasons for them being as terrible as they were, instead of just saying, okay, no, we don't need to we don't need to soften the edges around this. We can just look at it for what it is. Does that make sense?
Indeed.
Yeah. So, I mean, the movie itself is gorgeous, though. Kingdom of Heaven is absolutely cinema from a cinematography standpoint. It is epic in its vast wonder. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeously shot and really well worth watching. Just, aspects of the story make me go, that's a bit cringy. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I will.
head on to number 6.
That's the number I was looking for. Number 6, representing England.
Ooh,
That's
I
right.
like that land.
You knew the Ings were going to be represented at some point. And no, it's not Mary Poppins. It's something far more brutal.
Uh-oh.
My number 6 is Bronson. For those of you that don't know about Bronson, because it is not exactly a super duper mainstream flick, it was the film that made me notice just who the heck this Tom Hardy guy is. You talk about transformation.
Oof.
Man, oh man, from the shaved head to the mustache to just being absolutely jacked. You thought he looked huge in Dark Knight Rises as Bane. Oh boy, you ain't seen Bronson. He plays the guy who calls himself Charles Bronson, known as the most violent prisoner in Britain, the most violent criminal in Britain. And it's weird because this is a true story. In fact, a few weeks ago, he was up for parole again and denied again. And it's all because of his history in jail and out of jail for just fighting. And that's what it all boils down to. And I don't mean like getting into fights. I mean just like being able to like cripple people with his hands. That's what he's known for. Just beating the crap out of people. And like I said, the thing that's
What a legacy.
strange in about this is the fact that he's known as the most violent criminal in Britain, but never killed anybody. He does not have a body count. He has not killed anybody. But he's still basically behind bars forever because he still I don't know if he takes joy in hurting people because that's the thing when you're talking about someone that's real. You're talking about someone that's really alive. They make a movie about him, and but between what that person is willing to say about their life versus what some writer kind of has to fill in the gaps with, you won't get an entirely accurate story. What Bronson gives you is a brutal, ugly depiction of this man's sort of life and what may have sort of steered him in a direction that some might speculate leads him to kind of want to be in prison. Although it seems like he's kind of tired of that now, so he wants out. Um, but it's it's such an interesting look, and like I said, it's the singular movie that made me sit up and take notice of Tom Hardy, and just the fact that uh, people seem to forget that he is an amazing actor. He has done some things that like a lot of people just know him for like Venom or things like that. And no, because those things really don't do his talent justice. But if you're into just amazing performances and kind of dirty, gritty looks, like true crime stuff, check out Bronson. It's my number 6, and uh, how can you not uh, try to represent a country with its most something of anything, right? So I represent England with its most violent criminal.
Huh?
Number 6, Bronson.
If you like Tom Hardy and you like him as Bronson, although this character is not the same as that, but still, the kind of like ultra gritty and also ultra violent kind of character. The TV series called Taboo, which was on and still is, it's actually on Hulu, but produced by FX. It was amazing, and Tom Hardy starred in the lead role. It only ended up with one season. I wish that it would have gotten more, but it was absolutely astounding. And again, yeah, character range is definitely a thing that Tom Hardy has, and that character is no. That character's got a lot of range as well. You just might, if you like Tom Hardy, you might like that.
Love Tom Hardy.
So that might be something to go check out. Um, okay, my number 6. Okay, Italy. Italy, time to represent. Uh, for Italy, I have a movie which most of us have. Well, most of us have heard of this book. I don't know if most of us have read it. I actually read it when I was in high school as a part of advanced placement English program. Um, and we did a whole bunch of things around it. But when I saw this movie, I was actually kind of blown away by it. it so, couple things before I say the title of this movie. I feel like this movie, I feel like this story has been convoluted in so many ways and then restructured and reorganized a little bit like a King Arthur journey to sort of fit our narrative each and every time we retell it. Like, it changes depending upon what we find to be the most morally reprehensible and things like that. And in this particular one, where we are telling the story of the 9 circles of hell, getting any clues yet? Um, we we sort of come to a moment where we're starting to tell stories of sin in those 9 circles of hell with kind of representative sins, representative, how do we view gluttony, how do we view hubris, how do we view, our arrogance and pride and all that kind of stuff. um and I do find that kind of fascinating. But the Dante's Inferno from 2007 is probably one of the coolest ideas that I have seen in forever. It carries with it not just the, hey, let's go into the underworld, but oh no, I'm sorry. I said 2007 and it's 2010. Not just like let's go into the underworld, but also this idea that that the nine circles of hell have very different presences, that you can travel through them, and and unfortunately, I will say this: Dante's Inferno from 2010 was actually based on EA's video game, and so the thing that makes it work is that the video game was based on Dante's Inferno, which was basically written in the 1300s. So it checks out, like it checks all the boxes, I should say. But what makes this movie sort of fascinating is there is something about the animation style here that it just messes with your head in a lot of ways. It's ultra violent in a lot of scenes. It's high action. It's light on dialogue, but I feel like it really works. So I'm gonna say Dante's Inferno for Italy gets my number 6 spot. Um, I will say one other thing about Dante's Inferno. This is definitely like not animation for kids. This is animation that is purely adult animation, and it's it can get pretty nasty in some places. So, yeah, not a kids movie.
That's the 2010, you said?
It is. It's Dante's Inferno. It's called an animated epic.
All right. Just want to make sure I got the right one on there. And I did.
Because there is
Yay.
one from 2007, but the one in 2007 is basically like it deals with um it deals with uh more like US corporate greed. You know there's strip malls, there's the ideas that espouse us right now, that espouse the West right now. And as far as the animation goes, it's kind of weird. It's like this eclectic 2D style, which feels really super weird. But it's cool. It's just very weird.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's time to break into the top 5, Jen.
Yay! Ooh,
Cracking
I
through it.
love my top 5 is actually these are some of my favorite movies.
Well, you'll be able to get to talk about them soon enough. But until then,
Give
we're
me
going to talk
yours.
about my number 5. Maybe this will give you a hint. Do 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 do.
No,
Nothing?
no.
Oh. Well, uh, my number 5 is Tetris.
Tetris.
Yes, Tetris, representing Russia.
Was there a movie? Was Eurovision allowed Russia in?
Well, not this year, but in the past, yes.
Okay.
Like a couple years ago, they had this banging rap group. It was pretty awesome. Um, but that's we don't fault the artists for their insanely criminal leadership. So yeah, I went there. Um, anyway, it came out this year. As a matter of fact, Tetris came out this year, and it's on Apple TV, and it's the story of mostly Hank Rogers. Are you familiar with Hank Rogers?
A little bit, yeah.
So he went to CES many years ago. I believe it was 1988, and saw this game. He was trying to peddle his own game based on Go. Was it Go? I think it was Go.
Yeah, I think it was Go. Yep.
And he sees this other game there, and it's called Tetris. And he's like, "Oh my god, this is the perfect game." So he tries to get the distribution rights, but somebody already has them.
Oh my
So
god.
he tries to wheel and deal and finagle to get a piece of this in some way. And then at some point he winds up, working kind of hand in hand with Nintendo when it comes out that the rights might not be as clear cut as some have been making it seem. So everybody has to go to Russia. It's the Soviet Union, Russia. And this was, back before the wall fell, back when communism was the thing where let's face it, the guy that came up with Tetris, he wasn't allowed to profit from it. He wasn't allowed to make money from it. And, everything had to
Wow.
go to the government. And so there's all of this talking, these deals being made, and Russia had no idea what was going on because they had thought it was supposed to be one thing. Another business guy was like, no, we'll do it this way. And another guy's like, but we're going to do it this way. So, like, so many people on completely different pages. So when a new way to play is created and nobody has the rights to that, everybody wants them. So the KGB gets involved, and there is just a lot of insane subterfuge going on from mostly everybody as they try to get the rights for a video game. And this is all based on a true story. It's insane just what it took to get Tetris, the simple little block game, from Russia to everywhere else in the world. And it's I'm not going to say it's a spy thriller, on the same level as any other spy thriller. It's very focused on what it is. It's about a game and the people involved with that game. But there is some spy stuff going on and secrets being kept and friendships being formed. So it's a really fun and at times interesting at times and kind of exciting at times just to see what it took to get Tetris in your hands. That's why it's my number 5, representing Russia, Tetris.
Wow, that's such an interesting concept, actually. And also, I have to say that I find this as somebody who really looks at adaptations as with a critical eye, but also with a always interested in how to adapt a story from just about everything. I find the video game angle to be so incredibly fascinating because we're basically right now we're in a little bit of a renaissance of adapting video games into very, I would say, popular, if nothing else, fiction. And I mean, obviously, we're doing a lot of this through streaming services because they have money to put into things and create all kinds of different opportunities. But movies and video games have kind of always been a bit of an interesting idea. We've had a Pac-Man movie. We had just recently the Super Mario movie. We've had a Sonic movie. We have a whole lot of series out that are like The Last of Us and Halo and The Witcher. We've had a lot of really interesting ideas come forth from video games. So fascinating stuff. Really very cool. Good choice. Very good choice. Um, okay, my number 5 is a movie that needs zero introduction, and also most likely everyone not just knows about, but when I say the name, they're going to go, "Oh." Oh, that movie. From Poland comes Schindler's List. I saw Schindler's List a long time ago, obviously, when it first came out. I'll say that. And I was not just moved by Schindler's List; I wept openly. Um, it's I feel like we sometimes are things get so overcomplicated in our minds that we forget that the raw suffering of people, of a people, can be enormous to the point that other people are moved by their suffering. And this is definitely one of those times. But I think that the thing that Schindler's List kind of taught me is that it's not, by the time that it hits this crisis point, it's too late. That the everyday actions of us all can make a difference, that we can manifest changes in each other's lives or in the lives of people that we feel are disaffected or have any kind of sort of the other syndrome being attached to them. And that's the time to do it. The time to do it is then, not when it becomes the full blown crisis that we see in Schindler's List. I love the fact that in Schindler's List we have both a very strong protagonist, but a protagonist who's not afraid to also show his weaknesses, which I always felt was just so important to the story. Um, I don't know. There's something about Schindler's List that doesn't just sort of hit at the heart of, why things were so bad, but also is this like very in the central part of it, uplifting when you consider how much was put into helping other people and what kind of both compromises and dangers were attached to it. There's something so selfless and so incredibly powerful about this story that just makes it one that just lives on forever and ever. And if you don't know the story of who or what Schindler's List is, um, I I guess I don't really have time for like a whole filmography history of or a whole history of the time. But I will say this: um, Liam Neeson as Oscar Schindler gives a performance which is compelling, but I feel like it's also absolutely essential to understand. Um, like this isn't part of history that is like okay to just sort of gloss over. This is real important history that comes out of World War II. And the sometimes I feel like we spend a lot of time on Nazi Germany and we forget about Poland and we forget about what was happening and why these things all converged together. Why um why all of that was so important, why all of the other countries around them, Czechoslovakia and places that we forget we're all a part of. Well, maybe not forget that we're a part, but kind of don't honor enough. Um, and so those individual stories sometimes get lost. Schindler's List definitely, I think, elevates at least one such story to make help us to understand not just the time and period, but also the greatness of human beings when they are called upon to risk everything for other human beings. It's just sort of an amazing story. I absolutely love this movie on every level that I possibly could. This movie was actually um, designated as the culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant designation for the Library of Congress. So it remains a preserved film in the Library of Congress because that's how important it is. So, I just, long story short, this is such a great movie, absolutely worth watching. And Poland, I think sometimes doesn't quite always fit into the puzzle of World War II the way that it probably needs to for us to understand it better. So, Schindler's List and Poland is my Eurovision country of origin.
Interesting, interesting. And I'll have a little bit more to say about some of that in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
That's what we call a tease.
Good deal. I kind of like that.
Are you ready for my number four?
I'm so ready.
All right. But what can I say? Well, we have lists, right?
We have lists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you know what? I look at your list and you know what I say?
Tell me.
You call that a list? This is a list. Representing Australia. Yes, Australia's in Eurovision. Is Crocodile Dundee.
That's too funny that Australia is in Eurovision. That's hilarious.
Yes. And a lot of people don't understand why, and I can't say I completely do, but it has something to do with broadcast rights or stations or something. Eurovision's, you're entered in because a network broadcasts in your region. I'm not really sure how it works. I don't think anybody does. But
I'm not sure anybody.
Australia,
I'm not sure anybody understands it. I don't even think Australia understands it.
they're like, oh, if we get to play, awesome.
Yeah, right.
So,
I do feel like that actually is the energy that gets brought. Yep.
and they usually bring their A game, much like Crocodile Dundee, who becomes the focus of a story from by a reporter from New York, and it's your classic, you know, lady from the city in the outback. Things want to kill me, and her guide being like, "Eh, just, just, just a crocodile, you know, nothing phases him." Sorry, I had to clear my throat, so I muted myself. Anyway, it is a classic 1986 comedy starring Paul Hogan as the titular character. And you think, you would think that just that part of all of this crazy stuff happening in the Outback would be enough to make this movie hilarious. No, no, they do more than that because in a wonderful display of writing brilliance, yeah, I use those words. They flip the script, so to speak, and then have him be the fish out of water going to New York. And that's possibly even more hilarious as his, outback charm is applied to the citizens of New York and how, people just seem to like him no matter where he goes. I love Crocodile Dundee, and I'm one of those people that says I don't think I've watched one I haven't enjoyed. From an objective point of view, yeah, I'd say this is the peak Crocodile Dundee, but at the end of the day, you're just not going to go wrong watching this character do anything, and he's fun to watch. It's absolute hilarious film. My number four, representing in Australia, Crocodile Dundee.
Sweet. I actually really love that movie too. Um, I love to watch that movie back to back with Rescuers Down Under, just because there are so many shout outs in Disney's Rescuers Down Under to sort of the Crocodile Dundee idea, and it's pretty hilarious to see rescuer mice basically acting like big bad Dundee Mick kind of characters. It's very cool. So anyway, yes,
There
very good,
was a
good
kind of
choice.
fascination with Australia going on in the 80s, wasn't there?
There was actually my favorite song. The "Come to Australia, You Might Accidentally Get Killed" is like still one of my favorite songs to sing, because basically everything in Australia is trying to kill you. It's just hilarious. Love
It's
it.
true. Sing some of it for us.
No, I'm don't sing and no, 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 no. I know this is Eurovision, but no. Although this is a perfect segue because my number 4 is a
Hmm.
musical. So,
What?
yes, indeed. I chose for England a terrible time in England. In fact, it was so awful that people were making meat pies out of human beings. How awful is that? Yes, I chose Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, as my number 4. I know that a lot of people don't like this movie, and forgive me for putting it at my number 4 spot, but I gotta say, this is one of my favorite movies to watch. Helen Bonham Carter, Johnny Depp, Alan Rickman, the cast of this is amazing. The singing is gorgeous. And the bleakness, the dull lighting, the blue filters, the awfulness of just, what was happening. People being truly terrible and nobody ending up happy except the people that were completely untouched by everything that was going on, make me absolutely love this particular film. It's not I mean it's not necessarily a morality play, but it comes off as being very much a morality play. It's truly exceptional because the characters are so memorable. You can't talk about this movie and not relate to the characters being so much larger than life. Their songs represent not just who they are, but what's happening at the time, how desolate and difficult their lives are, how much revenge um, Mr. Todd wants, for what he believes happened to his wife and daughter, how terrible he feels about not being able to help, not being able to do anything, being the person who was taken advantage of. And then, Helen Bottom Carter, her character as Mrs. Levitt is so unbelievably deliciously terrible. Um on the top level, it looks like she's just trying to get by. She's just doing her thing. On the other level, it is absolutely she's terrible. She's a terrible person. And everybody gets their own karmic comeuppance. I just love this movie so much. The music in this movie is also great. I know a lot of it was taken from the Broadway play. And I have to say that that really does it justice. But the specific arrangements here are unique and fascinating enough to sort of add so much to the movie without sort of making you feel like you've taken a pause to sing a song. It just flows right into the narrative, which is great. That's the way that you do a musical. So my number 4 from England is Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street.
Sweeney told you so.
I just love. I love it. I mean, I love it so much. I even love the Beetle. Right? He's just such a slimy, terrible character, but it's so amazing to watch all of that unfold. It's I don't know. It's even hard for me to explain why it's just so awesome, but it really absolutely is.
Okay. I see you, Jen. Well, I don't see you, but yeah, I get what you're putting down there with Sweeney Todd. You mentioned it on the show before,
I
and
think I have
yeah,
actually.
yeah, it's going to be one of your Regular selections like my Kevin Smith, I suppose.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I definitely have a sweet spot for Johnny Depp in a lot of his past stuff. I really have had like an endless crush on Johnny Depp since I was like, I don't know, young enough to see him in Friday the 13th, I think. Um, but but I but my fascination with this particular movie is this. I think that this is like one of the to me one of the best sort of yes, it's dark. Yes, it's kind of like a horror movie, but it's also a musical. Alan Rickman's character is just everybody is so deliciously terrible, but it doesn't make it like you can't watch it. It's like they're deliciously terrible, and you know something terrible is going to happen to them, and I just love that. I just absolutely love it. So, so yeah.
Well, then I will be moving on to my number 3.
All right, get to your number 3.
I probably shouldn't be talking like this because I already did my England one, so it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure where that accent is. Is that like Cockney? No, is it more
Dick
like
Van Dyke.
London? Is it okay? I didn't know that there was specifically a Dick Van Dyke accent, but
Oh,
I will
absolutely.
leave you to that. Yes.
Well, hello, Mary Poppins.
Okay. Awesome.
Or I could just go into the Roy Kent. No? Okay.
See, I mean, both work. Both work.
Bloody
I
hell.
find I you know what I find this story like one of those kind of funny stories, right? A lot of movies now, when they're shot, they specifically ask for actors with English accents, and so the casting tends to be for actors that are English, that are from the UK. And there's a wide range of accents and stuff, but when a character for Charles Vane was doing his casting call, he had worked for many weeks on an English accent, and he didn't tell them that he wasn't from the UK. He just wanted them to hear what he had to say, and he got the part, but that's how important that English accent is. So don't quit your day job, Josh. Not yet. You got a little bit of practice to do.
Okay. But like I said, I already did my English one, so next is my number 3. And
Number
we're
3.
going to uh, jump over the water a bit and hit up Ireland. Because my number 3 is, again, not a movie one would imagine I would put on my list. But you know what? I love this movie, and it gives me all sorts of feels.
Hmm.
I'm talking about 2007's P.S. I Love You.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, maybe I don't know. I don't know what it is about this movie, because I'm not exactly a big Hilary Swank guy. I love Gerard Butler, and of course Harry Connick Jr., Jeffrey Dean Morgan. It's got a cast to it, um, but it's about a young widow that is left 10 messages by her late husband to kind of help her cope, and that's one of the things. I don't know. It always hits the right sentimental spots for me to be able to not only believe in a love so strong that it kind of reaches beyond the grave, but not in a spooky way. It reaches beyond to help her cope and help her kind of move on. That's essentially what the message is: learning how to deal with grief and get to acceptance. And it also has a banging soundtrack featuring Flogging Molly, one of my favorite bands. but the story is so incredibly sweet as she goes to Ireland to kind of learn more about the man that she loves so much. To really become intimate with uh, what made him uh, become the person that he was. And something about this movie that it does have this intangible that I can't quite place my finger on that just made me uh, fall in love with it so hard. It's set in a very beautiful place, telling a very touching story with a wonderful soundtrack to kind of guide you through uh, a lot of the emotions involved in her journey. P.S. I Love You is, I'm gonna say it's a very underestimated movie, and often seems forgotten when it comes to films of this nature. But I'm here
or
to say that I haven't forgotten you. That's why it's my
or
number three.
delegated as a chick flick.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That it does get that connotation, and that's, you know, it's kind of a misrepresentation. I think does it have all of the classic trappings of what someone would call a chick flick? Sure, but I think if you know more, and I hate to say like, well, if more men gave it a shot, but it does kind of boil down to that, doesn't it? This
Yeah,
is a story that shouldn't be held back by what you identify as, right? It shouldn't be something that this you disqualify because of any of that. It's a touching story, and if you want to feel a certain way, and what if you're in a relationship especially, and you see this guy, he's a guy, he's just a guy, right?
right.
But he made sure that when he knew he wasn't going to be around, that he would still be there in a way to help the woman that he loves. And I think it's something that everybody could really strive for when it comes to um, being able to show and feel and establish even deeper connections with the person that you proclaim to love.
Yeah, I agree, and I would push back on the chick flick thing because it's not. It's just that I think a lot of people think of it that way, but it definitely it's a lot more than that. I actually really love this movie. That was a good choice. Okay, my number three is um okay. My number three is a movie that I saw last year, I guess it was. And I actually went to go see it in the theater. I was so I thought that this was like a movie to go see in the theater. It just felt like this was important to see there. Partly because I knew that it was going to be done like every other Eggers movie that I've ever seen, which is he composes shots in his head with aspect ratio in mind, and you can see it in the way that the landscape especially unfolds in front of you, and the aspect ratio changes when you bring it onto a TV screen. It has to, because we don't have the same aspect ratios on TV screens as we do for huge movie theater screens. So there are things that happen that don't always translate as well, or you get kind of parts of the scene that are cut off. um you just simply don't get the same kind of broad beauty in cinematic scope that you do when you watch things on the big screen. So I went and saw Northman on the big screen. And Northman is it's loosely supposed to take place in Iceland. And it's one of those movies that's just sort of like look, it's narratively it's a Hamlet story. I mean, it's a boy who sees his father killed by his brother, and then his brother takes away his wife and marries his mother and marries her, and then come to find out it seems like the mother actually it doesn't seem like the mother helped to plan this boy's father's death. So I mean it's very Hamlet like, except no ghosts. um excuse me. The Northman, aside from it being a Hamlet story, though, is all show and very little tell. So there isn't like a ton of heavy dialogue happening. It's very much action oriented. And there's a lot of silent things to watch happening. And some of that is understanding how Eric, um, I actually wanted to call him Eric Northman. Oh my God, Alexander Skarsgård. How Eric Northman was a character that he played. How Alexander Skarsgård became this just man set on first avenging, but then realizing no, he needed to revenge. Um, and he blends into the scenery. He becomes part of the landscape, kind of like adding a bit of a King Arthur piece to it, where he really does take some kind of power from the land. Now, in the end, I won't like that's I won't spoil the whole story, but at the end, it is also the land that basically claims his life. And this kind of idea is so well done that it kind of it made me, first of all, really happy that I saw it in the theater, but it also gave me sort of like a new idea for mythic storytelling that deals with not just Viking lore, because it's not just that, but understanding that, Scandinavian storytelling is quite a bit different than even storytelling in the UK or Western Europe. There's some very different pieces to, especially the heroic cycle that happens in Scandinavian tales, which is set apart a bit, I think, from uh, Western Europe. So very interesting. It almost feels like it took, equal parts from Hamlet, and maybe like a little bit of warrior quest from Beowulf and things like that. It just all sort of blended in a beautiful unfolding story. So Northman gets my number three choice, representing Iceland. If you haven't seen Northman, you should definitely see it. It's just watching Eggers movies it's just such a treat. It's so beautiful. I absolutely love it.
It is on my watch list, has been for a little bit. Just haven't gotten around to it yet.
So it's so gorgeous. The movie itself is so gorgeous. I mean, it's a good story too, but it's just, there's something about the grand cinematics of it that's just, yeah, you'll like it. You'll like it a lot.
I'm definitely going to be checking that out at some point in the future.
All right.
So until then, I do have my number two.
All right.
And my number two has got quite the cast. It's got quite the director. And it's got quite the interesting imaginary best friend who happens to be Hitler.
Oh boy.
Representing Germany, Jojo Rabbit. it's interesting when you take a look at it, face value. Oh, it's about this kid in the in Germany as part of the Hitler Youth, and he has an imaginary friend, and that imaginary friend is Adolf Hitler, played by Taika Waititi. His mother's played by Scarlett Johansson, and the cast is filled out with Sam Rockwell of all people, and Stephen Merchant. So it's got talent for days, directed by and written by Taika Waititi, who most of you probably know for, Thor Ragnarok, and some of you,
What We Do in
uh,
the Shadows.
yeah, What We Do in the Shadows. If you're a Jin, that's what you know Taika from. But the boy finds out his mother is hiding a Jewish girl in their attic, and he comes to sort of befriend her as he starts questioning, the things that he's being taught in the Hitler Youth, as well as just the propaganda of the Nazis, and finding out what is and isn't right. The stories that he was told about what Jews are like uh, freaked him out, and so when he meets a Jewish girl and finds out, oh, that none of that is true. Okay, like I said, he starts questioning himself, and the war is raging on around him, and he's trying to get the best advice that he can from his imaginary friend. Sometimes it is absolutely surreal to see these things play out, and other times it is deeply tragic. It is, though, a hell of a story that I very hesitant to really go into details about. I believe Jojo Rabbit's one of those movies. The less you know going in, the better. And I feel it's still, what year did it come out? 2019. Yeah, I think it's still within that time frame. That um, it's not spoiled everywhere. So if you've managed to get uh, this far along without having anything told to you other than the things that I've said, then more power to you. Watch it now, because that could change. And I don't want to be the one to do it, to ruin uh, good storytelling, because that's a travesty in and of itself. But you will laugh. If you have a soul, you will cry, and if you have time, you will enjoy yourself. Jojo Rabbit is my number two, representing Germany, and I love this movie.
Awesome. That sounds pretty amazing. I've seen it and actually really love it. I think I've seen everything Taika Waititi, um, including every single episode of Wellington Paranormal. So yes, that's how much of a Taika Waititi fan I am. Um, okay, my number two. My number two is one of the coolest movies I've ever seen. And I think partly the reason that I love this movie so much is because I was a child of the 80s and I actually kind of lived through most of this. Um, the country of origin that this is representing is Norway. Now, it's more than just Norway, but let's use Norway as the biggest representation, because a lot of the band pieces that come out of here came from Norway. But there's also Sweden and a bunch of those you know Scandinavian countries. They all sound alike. No, I'm just joking. Okay, so here's the title of the movie is called Lords of Chaos. Now, Lords of Chaos is basically the story of Norwegian black metal. And the most fascinating things came out of this. Um it's boy, this is a really tough one to describe. There are certain things that happen in this movie describing what was the black metal scene, um that hint at some extremely dark behaviors, some very self-destructive behaviors, um things that I think in some ways really started to make people believe that black metal was about that, about self-destruction. um it it chronicles a band and some of the new recruits into the band. um but I think one of the most fascinating things about this is this idea that because of a few representative ideas that were brought forth, that somehow came to be the whole representation of this entire genre. And it really mattered. Other groups picked up on this and began to sort of like it, they were emboldened, I guess, to use some of these ideas and create for themselves really kind of dark things, a very anti-Christian. um there was a church that was burned down because of it. um a lot of just like, terrible things that should not have happened. And then the structure became black metal was satanic. It I don't think it actually was ever satanic. It In some ways, a lot of black metal, the lyrics are very anti-Christian, but being anti-Christian and being satanic are not the same thing. And there is such a powerful message that goes on with this about, the power of belonging, the power of basically doing what other people tell you to do. You think that this is what they want you to do, conforming. And even when you say that you're not a conformist, you are basically conforming to just something different, but you're still conforming. Um, this sort of idea about how your peers can really affect the person that you turn out to be, and how hard it is to refuse or even push back against what you might know is wrong. Lords of Chaos is really about the music, and man, there's a lot of really good music in this. But it's also about, understanding that angry, you know, ret- well, angry rhetoric, I guess is maybe the best way to say it. Um, Absolutely can lead to people acting in a way that maybe they never would have acted before. And then the public at large may end up completely misunderstanding, not seeing the cues, not understanding what's really happening, and they label one entire genre as the root of all evil when it's not. This was just, I mean, this was a crazy time to live through. And it was a crazy time, it was a crazy thing to watch unfold. But in retrospect, this feels like the rise of a lot of what we today truly should be labeling as, kind of fascist. It's these ideas that get put into people's heads that are so hard to push against, and you become indoctrinated faster than you can kind of even keep up common sense with. Things become so overwhelming that you act on all kinds of different things, and that's what each member of the bands did. They were acting in ways that I think that they weren't really committed to, but they felt compelled because of the pressure that was on around them. I'm gonna say one other thing about this. It's so funny to me that in a list about Eurovision, that I chose this movie to represent Norway, because Lords of Chaos is absolutely, from the death metal standpoint, it's absolutely the kind of music that people really hate. They hate it because it sounds like you're just screaming at them, and there's nothing but anger in it. And yet at the same time, the message is oftentimes, hey, pay attention. You know, the anger that people are feeling, you shouldn't ignore. You need to understand what's happening. Sometimes being angry is a call for help, is a call for um, cooler heads to prevail. And if we just blame the angry people for being angry, we actually don't get anywhere. And that, I feel like, is one of the central thematic points of this movie, is that it's complicated. Everything is very complicated. Some of the music in this is crazy good, and some of the music in this is just, it makes you feel so uncomfortable, both because it's difficult to hear specifically what's being said. Sometimes lyrics are masked behind massive amounts of noise, guitar riffs, and almost, I don't know, more than that. There's a lot of sound that's coming out of this, but also because the tone and tenor of what is being sung is not, it feels different from anything that we usually hear. It's not super melodic. It doesn't have a nice harmony strain. It doesn't have, sweet and gentle refrains. And because of that, it is uncanny and uncomfortable, and it makes you feel on edge and stuff. And that's the point. I mean, the point of all of this is there is something here, and it should make you feel uncomfortable. And this is the call. It's absolutely astounding, some of the stuff that happened in here. But I feel like this is also an excellent cautionary tale for the rise of groups that get together, and they have such power between them. And even if the power doesn't exist outside of the circle, it very much exists inside of the circle. And they are willing to do very dark things because the circle calls them to do it. The circle meaning like the pure, the pure group. Anyway, I love this movie. I wish more people would sit all the way through it, because I feel like it's got a really powerful message. And yeah, there is part nostalgia going on in here, just because I do remember this. I still remember being told, um, sort of OT, but not quite, that me playing Dungeons and Dragons was satanic. That it was, part of a conspiracy to make people turn to demons and, other sort of, evil temporal beings that might be existing, and to turn your attention away from God. I mean, I still remember those days, and I feel like even normal people who wouldn't specifically be so histrionic about things were absolutely called to jump on those bandwagons and say, yes, rock music was the source of all danger and terrible things. And while this story, Lords of Chaos, really goes into some of the super dark stuff, um by extension, a lot of this had happened before, with rock music being very villainized and all kinds of things being said they were satanic. So anyway, super interesting. Love this movie. Lords of Chaos, Norway.
Awesome. Very cool.
Have you ever seen Lords of Chaos?
I have not.
Do you like death metal?
Some. It's not a mainstay on my rotation, but there is some that gets me by.
Yeah, I don't have a Pandora station dedicated to death metal, but there are certain moods that I can get into where death metal becomes almost anthem like, and it's good. It's really good. Some of it's absolutely crushing. And there's actually a lot of technical prowess that goes into making some of the musical strains. It's not like it's just a cacophony of just, sound. There is something really technically amazing at the center of that music. So, but it is really hard if you, especially if you haven't heard it before. I think it can feel very discordant and difficult to understand. So,
Well, you know what time it is.
is it time for number one?
It is time for number one. What?
Oh wait! I gotta tell this story. I got this guy on TikTok. I swear I'll send him to you. He does that same kind of voice, but with very positive reinforcement. So like clean your room and take care of yourself and go to bed, and it's actually really funny. That just reminded me. So thanks, Josh. All right, what's your number one? What's the country it's from, first of all?
Well, as I mentioned before, um, I was going to mention Poland
Hmm.
in World War II, and that's where we're at. But it's not. It's not the same film as you,
Oh
because
no!
no, apparently we have no crossover tonight, which is surprising to me a little bit.
Wow.
Um, Crossover countries, but no crossover films. No, my representation of Poland is, uh, strangely enough, from 1942.
Oh.
Kind of weird, huh? A 1942 film about World War II, set in Poland, and it's about an acting troupe, and it's called "To Be or Not to Be," and it's absolutely hilarious. Now, first of all, there was hmm, there was a bit of a contest, a battle, if you will, in my head over which version to go with, because there are two very um, wonderful versions of this movie. One starring Mel Brooks, and as I've mentioned before, you can't go wrong with Mel Brooks. So the fact that he was in a remake of this, and absolutely crushed it, um, should go to speak volumes about how we feel about the original. Because yes, Kevin Smith is my guy, but before Kevin Smith, there was a Mel Brooks. But before there was a Mel Brooks, there was a Jack Benny.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Really, because I have no idea.
I think I know the movie.
To Be or Not to Be stars Jack Benny and Carol Lombard as stars of a Warsaw Theater Company in, well, Warsaw. And there is a young pilot who has become smitten with uh, the missus of the tandem, and they had this signal, right, for him to go backstage. When when Joseph starts his to be or not to be portion of the play, he that's the signal. So, Jack Benny begins to be or not to, and he sees this guy just get up and walk out. He's like, huh. And then it happens again, and he's like, and he just gets really agitated that this guy keeps leaving as he begins his speech every night. The guy leaves. He's getting his chance to shine, and the guy just walks out on him. Unbeknownst to him, he was going to go see his wife. Well, he's going to go see Joseph's wife, and no, it's not one of those where Maria, the wife, is having an affair. No, she's kind of, I guess, liking the attention, but is certainly not going to be leaving her husband or the stage to run off with this pilot. But it's during this that they find out that Poland is being invaded. So very soon the actors are in Nazi-controlled Poland, being occupied. And, well, Jack Benny and Carol Lombard do an amazing job of transitioning from, just straight comedy to more nuanced comedy, I would say. It never really leaves the area of funny, even when things are supposed to get serious. It's the early 40s. You have arguably one of the greatest comedians of that, or I will say any generation, leading your film. So you're not going to stray from his natural, stomping grounds as far as comedy goes. But the way they tell the story of this theater group and how they deal with not just Nazis, but with people in a resistance, as information is being supplied to different areas of the war. It leads to some very funny moments, especially when, of course, the troop has to eventually act like their occupiers and act their way through a mission, if you will, and so they can make an attempt to get out of Nazi-occupied Poland. The most interesting thing about this is the fact that it was made in the early 40s while the war was raging, as it were. And it reminds me of The Great Dictator, whom, if you've seen, Charlie Chaplin's classic film, The Great Dictator, you probably already know, but some of you might not know, that was not a movie that was made, after the fact, right? This was made before even a lot of people in the U.S. were, I don't want to say aware of what was going on in Europe, but they certainly weren't invested. But there were a lot of immigrants from especially those areas of Europe that had come over during the time and build lives for themselves in the States, sure, but still had like a second foot back home. And the news of the Nazis moving through Europe and kind of taking over everything that got in their way was absolutely distressing to many, as they watched their homes get taken over. To be or not to be is, I mean, some at the time might say it's just a little bit I mean, not straightforward political comedy, but it was definitely uh, news of the day kind of stuff going on. As they're telling their funny story about some of the worst atrocities ever committed on Earth, and they they absolutely succeed in telling their story, and I can only imagine what it was like to like see it, as it released, not knowing half of what we know now, barely knowing a quarter of what we know now, and how that might change their attitude towards what they're seeing on the screen. It was, like I said, remade with Mel Brooks many years later, and you do kind of see the slight. I'm not really going to go into what's different, but it's mostly very much the same. And I think the real differences are with the nuance and the slight handling of the material at the time. But of course, it also has that separation of time, so it definitely had more room to grow and to become more of its own thing. Um, but it's the 1942 version of "To Be or Not to Be." That is my number one representative. Poland. Yeah, number one, Poland.
Job. That was actually a good movie. That was also a really good explanation of it too.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, my number one movie is it is it's both a Swedish movie and it took place in Sweden. It is it is one of the most iconic movies I think made by Ingmar Bergman. Ingmar Bergman was one of those directors that just, man, he left a mark on the world, just an absolute mark. Um, I mean, like when I consider who are the most influential filmmakers of all time, Ingmar Bergman is right up there. Because I can't think of somebody else who has made such a contribution to film in as many ways as he did. The movie that I chose was called The Seventh Seal. Now, The Seventh Seal, for anyone who doesn't know, is a bit of a historical fantasy. It is a sort of a okay, so and I'm paraphrasing this. This is not something that I normally see people say, but I think this is maybe a good explanation. It's a little bit like Death Takes a Holiday, except the idea here is that um, death is profoundly interested in what is happening, and how not just people but also events are passing. And of course, death does not have the same kind of mortal understanding, and so a lot of the film is a kind of expose, but also, you know lots of metaphor. One of the most iconic scenes in the entire movie is Death playing chess, and as he is playing chess with Antonius, it becomes kind of obvious as they're talking what what is at stake here. Basically, he after he talks to Death, he challenges him to a chess match, and he says, or he believes that as long as the chess match continues, that he won't die. And so he continually tells this story. He talks about his family. He talks about uh, you know, God and Christ and um, a bunch of things. He talks about many things. He also talks about art, and that is always kind of an interesting thing because there's a subjective nature to it. Um, he talks about some rather, I think, existential ideas of humanity, things that don't have easy explanations attached to them, but he does his best to sort of, give explanations that may or may not be sort of the best. um this movie is this movie is kind of it's almost surreal in both its inception and in its execution. Um it it doesn't quite reach the level that I think that we would be comfortable with today in understanding wider allegories of story, because we just don't have these stories available to us anymore. We don't watch movies like this anymore, and that's not to get all, oh, this is so much better, because that's not really where I'm going with it. Um, but it's a different kind of storytelling, and the visuals in the Seventh Seal are glorious beyond reckoning. It's done in black and white, and anyone who's ever done black and white photography will tell you that it is a lot harder to judge lighting and get what you want to get out of a scene based on shadow concepts, um because there's just the variables are many, but you don't have hues, you have many shades of gray. And it's just becomes a very interesting prospect. But Ingmar Bergman makes these scenes seem effortless. They look gorgeous. They line up so perfectly. And there's a lot of this movie that feels like what I think in later years we sort of began to understand in terms of framing composition. And so that also is why it gets a huge giant yay from me. Um but the story itself is what is the most compelling. um he um let's just say that Antonius, I think, believes that he can escape death. But death very specifically says, look, nobody escapes death. Period. It's Death is not something to be escaped ever. Um, when death wins and says that when they meet again, it'll be the last time that they meet, he, it's like he's foreshadowing his death, but he also, I think, to Antonius, he believes that he's getting a reprieve. And that was, I think, very interesting. He in retrospect, when you watch all of this kind of end with the dance macabre, you understand that the dance of death is the ultimate ending to everything. It's just so fascinating. Everything about this movie is such an interesting idea to try to conceptually put into story, where, we're a lot more straightforward about our how, like, when we look at a story, if we had I'll give you a great example. This movie uh has a lot in common with Meet Joe Black, which was a movie with Anthony Hopkins and a very young Brad Pitt, and death comes to take Anthony Hopkins, but Anthony Hopkins' character basically says, "Look, I'm a really powerful and influential person, and I have things that I need to take care of before you take me. Would you consider staying with me and let me finish? Let me do what I want to do?" And I'm not saying that this movie acts, The Seventh Seal does not act that way, but it has a lot of that same character feeling to it, where death is sort of its own persona. Death has its own objective agenda, but ultimately the agenda that cannot be ignored is death itself. Death as a practice cannot be ignored. Um, I love this movie. I feel like everybody should watch it at least once in their lifetime. And it often ends up in, books of top 500 movies, books or lists that, include the best movies that you must see and things like that. This almost always makes it in there. Not companion, but the other movie that Ingmar Bergman made, which is of similar, if not excellent quality, on the same level, although it doesn't get a lot of love. Is called The Virgin Spring, and I'll save that for another time. But it is truly also one of Ingmar Bergman's most epic statements on humanity. It's absolutely beautiful. Think House on the Left, but Middle Ages. Really, really excellent. So number one for me, The Seventh Seal, Sweden.
There you go. Our lists are complete. How do you feel about it?
I thought this was a pretty good list. I only really kind of didn't get one movie that I feel like I just kind of I crossed wires on, but everything else feels pretty good.
That's good. Any comments on my list?
Your list was great. I mean, you totally nailed everything on your list.
I had so much fun putting this one together.
Nice.
And I actually did did a little bit of research. I know, crazy me, but I wanted to make sure that the movies that I selected, as well as the countries selected, were sort of relevant to the Eurovision conversation, and getting the sweet tie-in of ABBA with Mamma Mia, and getting music in where I could. Absolutely loved it, and also wanted to throw in movies that I haven't really had a chance to talk about before, that I really much enjoy, and just I think this list opened up a lot of doors for a lot of things that a lot of ground that I haven't been able to cover yet, and thought it was a lot of fun.
It was. It definitely was.
So, the way I sees it, maybe you sees it the same way. I'll go over my list, and then you go over your list, and give us next week's homework.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, for this, the lists of Eurovision nations in film. You can find the completed lists on Letterboxd at 1021pod. My number 10 is Mission Impossible, representing Ukraine. My number 9, Mamma Mia, representing Greece. Number 8, representing Iceland, Eurovision, the story of Fire Saga. Number 7, representing France. Representing France. I should have done accents the whole time. Oh, well. Mrs. Harris Goes to Bears. Number 6, representing the UK. It's Bronson. Number 5, representing Russia. It's Tetris. Number 4, representing Australia. Mate, it's Crocodile Dundee. Number 3, representing Ireland. Good to hear from you, lad. It's P.S. I love you. Number 7. Yeah. It is the Jojo Rabbit. No, that sounded French. Just pretend I said that in a German accent. And number 1, not going to try a Polish uh, accent at all. It's 1942's To Be or Not to Be. Jen, what is your top 10 Eurovision nations in film?
Okay, my list starts as follows. Number 10, Ordet from Denmark. Number 9, Spectre from Austria. Sort of. Oh, sorry about that one. Number 8, Capitan a la Triste, Spain. Number 7, Kingdom of Heaven, Israel. Number 6, Dante's Inferno, Italy. Number 5, Schindler's List, Poland. Number 4, Sweeney Todd. Yes, that demon barber of Fleet Street from England. Number 3, Northmen, Iceland. Number 2, Lords of Chaos, Norway. And number 1, Seventh Seal from Sweden. I bet you're wondering, what are we going to do next week?
I am.
Okay, well, next week we're going to change things up just a little bit, okay? Because this
we're gonna
list
make cookies instead of lists.
Well, I was going to go with cheese logs, but okay,
Okay.
instead we'll make cookies. No. Okay, so this next week we are going to talk all about and create lists for movies that critics hated but we love. So, a top 10 list of movies that critics hated but we loved. So that could be anything from one of my favorites is King Kong from I'm sorry, no, not King Kong. That was the audience or critics actually like King Kong. Um what was a good Oh yeah, I just wasn't saying the right thing. Godzilla, King of the Monsters was panned by critics, but I loved it. I thought it was great. I had such a fun time with that movie. Things like that. Uh, when it first came out, everybody hated Constantine. I mean, the critics hated it, but audiences loved it. They thought it was awesome. And so I'm sure that you must have some movies that critics hated, but you're like, why? I love this movie. It's fabulous. I have a whole list of movies that I think that critics, I don't know what they were smoking that day or who they got into an argument on the way to their writing assignment, but whatever they was happening to them that day, they clearly did not get from the movie what they needed to get from the movie because I thought it was great. So does that sound like something that's doable?
It's gonna take some digging, but I think I can get it done.
I feel like it's going to be an interesting idea because critics don't see sometimes the cult value of a film, or they don't see the pure entertainment value of something,
Yeah.
and audiences sometimes see it and go, but this was great. Yeah, so let's I think we can definitely come up with some good stuff.
I
What
think
do you think?
so too. I was just trying. What metric are we going to be using for figuring out what the critic score is?
Well, if critics scored it below 60, so meaning, anything that is like 3 stars and below,
Mm-hmm.
that would, I think, probably be a pretty good metric. 3 out of 5, right? Not 3 out of 4.
Okay. Okay.
Or, if your Metascore is like, below 60, that's usually not very good. And Rotten Tomatoes works on a 100%, so, anything under 50 is usually not good.
Okay. We're looking for rotten reviewer scores, not audience scores, but critic scores.
Right. And the better the aggregate on the score, like, the more critics hated it, generally the better that is if you liked the movie, because it means that you're getting, kind of a representation instead of just one or two people that didn't like it. Like, I'll give you another example. I won't use this on my list, although I feel like I definitely could. I loved the movie Silent Hill. I loved
Mm.
it. It was everything I wanted it to be. I mean, it needed more, and there were some problems, but so what? I sat in the theater and was like, "Yay, the nurses! This is exactly what I wanted to see." And everybody else in the theater was having a great time. And then after I realized that the audio or that the critics hated it, I was like, "Oh my god, did we watch the same movie? What the heck happened here? Did you guys not play the game?" Like, that's what it felt like. So that would be a good example. And I think the score on Silent Hill was like only 30%. It was like really low, but audiences gave it like an 8. So yeah.
Okay. Well, Jen, got a question for you.
Tell me what your question is, Josh. I shall answer.
I know you don't deal with rotten things like food.
I
What?
tried not to.
Where can I find some fresh recipes as they relate to movies and television that I love?
Every recipe that I have at moviesandmeals.com is absolutely certified fresh. Fresh because we make every single recipe that we post. So we guarantee that you will love making that food, even if you don't love tasting it. Actually, that's not true. We love everything we make. So head on over to moviesandmeals.com. Also, join me tomorrow for my podcast, The Storyteller Power Hour, where this week we will be. I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about this week. We are going to talk about something specifically that relates to what is happening with the Hollywood strike right now. I've got a lot of interesting kind of ideas about what is happening, why it's happening, and what we can all do to help support writers in all
Psst,
of these various phases.
psst,
Yes.
psst. Is that what
Am
you're
I
talking
missing?
about tomorrow?
I thought it was, isn't it? Did I miss something? Am I not talking about that tomorrow?
Brian,
Oh, is that tomorrow?
that's
Oh my
tomorrow.
gosh. Okay, well, okay. So apparently tomorrow I'm not going to be talking about the writer strike. Although actually I will. I will start off the conversation with the writer strike. We have a special guest tomorrow. So we will be talking specifically about stories that, well, let's just say there's a musical component to albums, but there's also oftentimes a narrative component to albums. So how can we together as writers come up with ideas that bridge that gap and possibly create full stories out of the music that we listen to? I think it's going to be an interesting conversation, but we'll let my guest kind of take the lead on some of that, because I think he may have some interesting ideas.
Yes, tomorrow's guest is author Brian Payon.
I think it's going to be an interesting conversation for sure. It's going to be really interesting for me now because I need to get my story notes together. So I will do that tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow
Mm-hmm.
I'm a week off schedule. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, whatever. That's what happened. What about you, Josh? What and where can we find all of your interesting and awesome ideas?
Oh, I don't have any.
Yes, you do. And don't lie.
Okay. If you feeling froggy and you want to check out the things that I do, you could always go to wadcomedia.com. It has all the appropriate links to the socials. And you could, hit the like button on a few of those and maybe hit subscribe and, maybe tell your friends. And if you really like what we do, there's a Patreon that I really, really ignore. I mean, I completely ignore that thing. So I don't even know why I keep mentioning it. But if you're feeling super supportive, there is a merchandise shop. We don't really get much of anything from sales as it is, but I think it's just cool that if you want to spend money to show support, I think it's better to have something to hold in your hand rather than tip for the idea of, okay, you're doing good, I guess. Here's something. A T-shirt, a coffee mug, whatever the case may be. All the designs are created by a top designer of my house. Who am I kidding? I'm not even the best designer of my house. My kids know this technology inside and out. I don't know why I don't get them to do it. Anyway, and excuse me. And if you really like the sound of my voice, you can always check me out every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on the Wadcast, the Writers, Actors, Director podcast. And this week, I might be a little bit psychic. Because we're going to be talking about how did we put it? We were going to have a little conversation about video games that we'd kind of like to see adapted into films.
Cool.
And that's what's coming out. I personally will be doing a little bit of fan casting as well. Really getting into the spirit of everything. Maybe I'll attach a director and then get super depressed when I realize that it's definitely not going to happen. But that's the way it works. You come up with these ideas and you're like, oh, that is so awesome. That is so great. And no one's paying me to come up with this, and it will never see the light of day. But this sucks. Having good ideas is terrible when you can't do anything with them, because you don't own the property and you don't have millions of dollars to hire the people that you want to. You know how it is. But that's the Wadcast Friday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And of course, there's 10 to 1 every week right here, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. And I want to say 3:30 Hawaiian.
Yep.
Sweet. I nailed the time change.
You did. Good job.
I'd like to think I learned a little bit something.
It's amazing.
Absolutely. Well, and we, for us, kept things kind of brief tonight. So I hope everybody comes back tomorrow for the Storytellers Power Hour. Jen does an amazing job hosting that show and having a special guest, an author, to talk about storytelling. It's going to be amazing. I guess there's only one thing left to do.
What is that, Josh?
Say goodnight, Jen.
Good night, Jen.